All right, well, thanks for coming, everyone. My name is Russ Pechman. I'm the Vice President of Lead Generation at LinkShare. And today is, I see we don't have the PowerPoint up on the, okay, I'll wait just a minute. But specifically, I'll probably focus a little bit tighter on this subject, which can really cover and span so many different areas, and we can talk about it for days. But I'm going to focus primarily on the publisher perspective and sort of how, as a publisher, you might evaluate both this overall lead gen landscape, the types of offers that are out there, and sort of where you might fit in and add value as a publisher to lead generation. So, show of hands, how many folks here actually say that they do lead generation today or work in the lead generation space? A few of you. I know you mostly on the publisher side. Some advertisers? Advertisers? Okay, good. Well, in general, it's going to be a bit of an overview. I hope everybody takes something away from this, but should at least provide a framework and allow you to look at things in maybe a different way than you might have before, and also maybe provide some additional information about some new things that are going on in the lead gen world. Just a little bit about myself. I've been at LinkShare for about 5 years. I've started the Lead Advantage lead generation network at LinkShare a couple of years ago. It's a little backwards. We started the Lead Advantage Network a couple of years ago in 2007. I've now oversee the network, which currently has about 100 advertisers in the network, and we focus on verticals primarily around financial services and education and business services and a few others. Before LinkShare, I also ran an e-commerce international children's product site and did that for a while and started out in online journalism and online marketing for financial publications like Institutional Investor. So just wait now until we get this. My panel here today is, I don't have a panel, it's just me. The format of the session is really just me without a panel talking, but I do hope and encourage that for any of you that have questions or want to share some comments or experience that they have through the work that they've done in lead generation, to please raise your hand or feel free to discuss. I'm just one perspective, and I'm sure there's many others around some of the issues that we'll be covering today. How was the keynote? Good? Good. Yeah? Okay. All right, well, yeah. Hey, all right. There's the agenda we just talked about. So first off, really, is just to make sure we're all on the same page as far as definitions, what lead generation is. And I took this quote from a wise man named Wikipedia, who says that lead generation is the creation of prospective consumer interest or inquiry into a business's products or services. So that means it's one piece, again, along this cycle of sales. You are interacting and engaging with the customer who may have been researching a product for a couple of hours or a few months, and through the interaction you've created with them, they have raised their hand and said that they're interested in learning more, at which point you're bringing them through to someone who may potentially follow up on the process and lead them through the experience closing to a sale, which could happen, again, the next day or weeks and weeks later. So that process is just that engaging to to generate interest, where interest has been generated. When we look at how the lead gen industry overall has been doing online, this is 2008, which now seems like a long time ago. But if you remember thinking back, we already were in the midst of the mortgage meltdown by late summer, credit crunch soon after that, and overall lead generation, while there's lots of verticals that participate in it, industries that have long sales cycles and high service capability that require interaction prior to a sale make up a lot of what lead generation is. So you see a lot of financial services who participate in that. So it's interesting to note that although we've seen some hits to the financial services industry in '08, we still saw growth. We still saw 6% year-over-year growth in ad spend. We still saw 7% of all online ad spend coming through lead generation, which is pretty similar to what we had seen the prior year. And financial services, while down a bit from where they were in '07, still represented a pretty hefty percentage of overall online ad spend, which shows that the opportunity is still there. And in 2009, I think you're seeing the same thing. It'll be interesting to see where these numbers pan out at the end. But I think what you might be seeing is while certain types of advertisers have really pulled back on their spending, certain types of financial players are not as interested in getting as many leads. We're looking to really tighten up the criteria about what they accept. New types of players have entered the space. There's still a lot of demand for loans, for emergency loans, for new types of how to help with their mortgages in some new capacity, for debt settlement services. So other types of financial players have increased spend while some perhaps bigger, more traditional players have pulled back. And it's certainly provided an opportunity for new types of advertisers as well as for publishers to move in this business. Of course, we see insurance still doing well this year and others. And outside of financial services, even just due to the fact that we are in a recession environment, you certainly still continue to see areas like online education be highly, have a high demand for them. So the form is really, when you think about where the commissionable action occurs in a lead gen transaction, it's often this online form. Now that's true, but of course a lot of the action really happens outside of the form. For the publisher, it's sourcing that traffic in whichever way they know how, and then ultimately getting them to this form, and then afterwards the advertiser still has to do much once they've actually captured this data and been able to convert it. So when you look at a lead and you're starting to evaluate an offer, you look at a form, and some of the things you might evaluate are the types of customers that you can drive based on the types of media that you work with and the type of vertical expertise you might have. Does it make sense? Will your customers be amenable to a form of this length or complexity? And is the CPA that you might be generating be able to get or earn from it? Does it make sense based on the types of conversions that you can get? That's one side of it. The other side of it is looking at what happens after the form. And a lot of publishers kind of don't really worry too much about that because they say, well, I've got that form completed, my job is done. But that's not really true, especially if you have customers who are people you interact with regularly. You kind of want to know what the experience is going to be afterwards. Are they going to get bombarded with a ton of calls or leads? And that may be okay, but it's good to know sort of what that experience will be for the customer, especially if it's going to affect your brand in any kind of way. Additionally, you might want to look at what the advertiser is capable of. If you're able to drive 5,000 completed forms on a daily basis, what kind of capacity does the advertiser have to handle that? Do they have one person in a cubicle who's going to be following up with these calls? In which case, the lead is probably not going to be closed or re-engaged for several days, which is generally considered probably a stale lead, so it's going to be harder to close that lead. And while, again, you're not necessarily getting commissioned on what happens in the close, ultimately it's important for you because an advertiser has to worry about their cost of sale. And if they're spending all this money on leads that they can't close for whatever reason, whether it's because they don't have the bandwidth or capability to close them, or because the lead quality is not where it should be, that should be a concern for you as well, because ultimately they have a cost of sale that they have to keep to. And if you're not reaching or within that range, and their ROI is not positive, they're going to ultimately either not want to work with you anymore or certainly have a rethink the relationship. So we look at this chain of media that ultimately goes from the customer to the advertiser in the sale. And different publishers will play and take different positions within this chain. There might just be one or two players. It may be a publisher getting organic traffic and then driving them to an advertiser's form, or it may be someone buying media on search or buying a lead through a third party or through some other party. There could be two or more players, and you have to think about how much value you can add on that chain. Ultimately, the CPA, the highest CPA starts with the first person closest to the advertiser, so a lot of people want to be closest to the advertiser, but if that publisher still has to pay out most of what they're getting because most of the economic value is being added somewhere else on the chain, then it's something you have to think about how much value you can add. Are you able to better target this customer? Are you able to find a customer through your media spend that's difficult to find? That's value add. And the more value you can add, the more effort you're able to put in, the more targeted and unique your ability, the more you can command of the entire economic pie. And ultimately, you may also be someone who is at the point where you are hosting part of the form, in which case you can have a lot more control around that lead data. So what do advertisers want? I mean, it's important to think about. You know, it's obviously what, as publishers, you want to get good CPAs and low conversions and overall drive up your volume and your profit. But it's important to think about what advertisers want. They obviously want leads. They want quality and volume, and in basic, right? And some want quality more than they need volume. There's a priority usually between them, and you can usually tell which advertisers have more priority over which one. For quality, that really means, you know, at what rate can a lead convert into a transaction, into a sale. And typically, where the advertiser has a high cost associated with closing that sale, they require a lot more interaction, they require a lot more material or time in order to close a transaction. They're going to be a little bit more concerned about quality. Every lead is going to count a lot more than perhaps a type of advertiser where the follow-up process is more automated. You know, you might see that among retailers or some online types of merchants where they're just getting some email addresses, they're putting it into their system, and they're going to include them into a newsletter or catalog drop or something, in which case the cost is typically a little bit lower. There's a little bit less concern about quality in that case. There's much more concern about volume. And usually in verticals, you might see a different span depending on what the vertical is. But depending on the level of quality they need is often going to depend. It's also going to correspond with the CPA rate. So you might see conversion rates for retail or ringtones are typically pretty high, but they're probably going to pay out a lot less for them. They're high because all they need is maybe an email address or a couple of fields in order to get that person into their system, where they can hope to sell them over time through various automated correspondences. Whereas you go to the other spectrum, you've got sort of lending and financial services where there's also a risk associated with accepting that lead for the advertiser. You know, there's default costs. There's lots of fields that are required and information that's required. So CPAs will typically be higher. The ultimate value for the advertiser is going to be higher. Conversion rates are going to be a lot lower. So you have to know from your end and the types of media and ways in your business model how much traffic you can drive, the type of traffic you can drive, so you can understand where you're going to get your return. Talking again about quality, this is definitely a overriding trend. There's definitely a flight to quality. You see a lot of advertisers and buyers just who have over time worked with a variety of providers and have gotten burned in many cases. They're looking for the volume, and volume's great, but often they find out 2, 3, 4 months later that maybe one of those leads of the many, many thousands actually turned into a sale. So you've seen over time this sort of condensing of the amount of providers that advertisers use, and they're much more concerned about quality and have a little bit less patience as well with giving new providers time in proving themselves. If they're seeing that the conversions are just not coming through, they're more quick to move on to a new partner. So it's definitely an increasingly important area. This is just talking about sort of where you fit. You mentioned co-registration. It's probably, co-reg is more on the sort of high volume. It's easy to kind of get a customer to, it doesn't require a lot of friction for the customer. They're already signed up for something, and to fill out this extra registration is going to give them something additional, or it's very easy to do so, or it's part of a pathway. There's kind of, it's an easy effort. So you're looking at a lot of volume, and typically the advertisers that work in co-registration are able to handle that volume, knowing that it's a numbers game, and a lot of them may end up not converting. Whereas on the other side, when you look at search, or you've got vertical sites that actually host forms, there's a lot more targeting going on here. There's a lot more sort of money spent specifically around filtering for certain types of customers. Phone verification even more. Some people actually get on the phone with their leads to verify that this person truly, really is interested in what they say they are before that lead is even passed on to the advertiser. So the more deep one gets into a specific type of category or vertical, usually the more targeted it is, more expensive it might be for the publisher, but the higher the quality, all the same. There's a wide spectrum of quality here. And we typically focus on that top right. But so I kind of say, talk about quality and volume as sort of mutually exclusive of each other, and that's not really true. In fact, I think quality can actually help you drive your volume. If you start generating some good leads that are actually closing sales for the advertiser, there's a higher likelihood that you're adding more value, their cost of sale is lower, your CPAs can ultimately be higher as a result. If you have higher CPAs, your margins can be higher, you can make more investment, you can drive more volume. So that's the idea. That's what people go for who look at quality. Does it always work? No, of course not. But essentially, starting from a place of quality starts you from a place of trust. If you start from a place of trust, you're more looked upon, more positively by the lead buyer, and it can lead you to better things down the road. There's other ways that you can actually target. You can have a short form. These are just a few things I'll mention here. Sometimes a short form with a few short questions, depending on what the offer is. Are you insured? Are you over the age of 24? What's your zip code? And then they'll take you onto the advertiser, where that advertiser can then most adequately engage with the buyer. And then the lead may occur at that point. Or, sometimes you can actually even get paid on that short form itself before you send it over and route it to the advertiser. Creative could include that type of filtering as well. An automobile dealer, you might put your make, your model, your zip, all in a piece of creative that's dynamic, and send that over to the advertiser, who can then deep link into the actual area where that person's requesting more information. Can you ask a question? Okay. And other types of targeted creative like data feeds, listings for real estate. There's all sorts of ways that you can more properly target a customer to filter or better qualify them before they get to the advertiser's page. You can buy specific URLs tied specifically around the type of offering that you've got. New Jersey rental apartments, I don't know. There's something you can do to buy. You might cost some money up front, but ultimately you're getting type-in traffic that is very, very geared towards the type of customer your advertiser is looking for. Niche content, keywords, ultimately there's all these ways that you can still target more. The other thing that's very key is communication with the advertisers. If you, or with a network who's able to communicate with you through the advertiser, if you're able to get a certain amount of feedback, that's really going to help you know how to spend your dollars and your time. If you're driving a ton of leads for an offer and you have no idea what's going on at the other end, you have no idea what the outcome is of those leads, you're really not going to be able to better what you do unless the advertiser is able to provide certain feedback. Yes, this one closed, this one didn't, or perhaps some additional other information. The more you're able to know, the more you're able to target and focus on what's working. So you got to be careful when there are advertisers that don't provide that type of communication, because one day you could wake up and you've been doing, putting $10,000 a day into Google and the plug is pulled. So it's important to try to understand if you'll be able to get that type of information. Sometimes advertisers just don't have the resources to provide that, but to the degree that they can on a somewhat regular basis, to give you an indication of where you need to be spending your efforts would be really most helpful for you ultimately in the long run. Forum hosting is obviously another way where you can continue to target even better. If you're actually the one who is able to, and the advertiser is okay or comfortable with buying leads that were completed from another spot or another location, it can give you a lot of control. It can allow you to filter leads in your own way. You can set some of your own forms. You can get better positioning on a search engine. Typically, search engines look more favorably upon a site where the person is going to end at that site. They're not being passed on to another site after that. You have stability as well. If you're able to sell a lead to multiple advertisers, you've got one campaign that's no longer working and the advertiser pulls out, you can replace that with another one. Or perhaps you can sell the lead multiple times in certain cases if the advertiser is okay with buying a shared lead, which is going to be even better for you. It'll allow you to actually increase your CPAs, increase your gross margins, and allow you to invest and spend more on your media. And you can control quality too. In certain cases, you might be able to, depending on what the advertiser's criteria is, distribute that lead to the appropriate advertiser, depending on what they were looking for. And ultimately, in some cases, you may actually be able to own the data. And if you can own the data, you can remarket it. If you can remarket it, you can email in the future. And you can learn how to do that. So you have future ways to add more cash flow. If you look here, this is a search page result for, I believe this word is debt elimination, New Jersey. And you can see the top paid publishers are all forum hosters, or they are advertisers themselves. And typically that's because they have focused on this vertical. They've created the position. They've been able to kind of increase their margins enough to buy the positions. And also I think the search engines, again, view it more favorably than a site that's going to pass somebody through in many cases. So if you do any type of vertical generic keyword, you'll see that in many cases the forum hosting sites are the ones who are generating the highest positions. Then you talk about brand. In many cases, publishers come into our network and if they see brands that they don't recognize or know, they won't pick up those advertisers, because often you have a piece of creative, you're trying to promote that banner, and if nobody's ever heard of that advertiser, they're probably not going to get a lot of click-throughs. If you're hosting a forum, it's a little bit of a different story. In many cases, the advertiser, on the other hand, their brand is not necessarily that relevant. You're the one that's relevant. You're the brand that is basically being put forward here. And through the people on that other page, they've driven traffic to their site based on their positioning, and then they've got a brand that they are presenting to that customer, who's then completing a form, and that customer may or may not know where that form is actually going. Hopefully you're telling them that the form is going to be sold somewhere, but they don't necessarily have to know exactly. It may not necessarily be that relevant who the advertiser is on the other end. And I ask here, what advertisers actually work with LendingTree? Some people may know, but most people, when they go to LendingTree, they're going to LendingTree and they're giving LendingTree their information, not necessarily caring so much that LendingTree is actually selling the lead to a few specific lenders who may be small regional players in a local market that you've never heard of. The brand is LendingTree's brand. They're the one driving it, and they're driving the experience. And often you've got buyers who they don't have good websites and know how to convert traffic. And if you do and can build a page or a site that's compelling enough where you can control that, then it's all the better for you and for them. So ways to ensure your quality and longevity of your site. You do have to be careful if you're going to create a site that's forum hosting not to be so cookie cutter. You don't want the same types of replicated information that you're seeing across from the same keyword. So making sure that you are differentiated, that you've got focused content, that you've got a real value proposition. Probably a lot of the things I imagine you've been hearing in some other seminars today or yesterday are just as relevant and important here, and going to be only more so. So if you're thinking about forum hosting, it does require some technological integration to some degree. Some networks, like LinkShare, we have a lead management platform. It's easy to just send your data over to us, where we can then pass them on to an advertiser, or occasionally, if the lead is potentially can go to one or more advertisers, we have the capability, and those who work with lead management systems have the capability to pass that lead along to the most appropriate advertiser based on whatever the criteria is that the advertisers might on their end have specified up front. Also, if you're more ambitious and you're really into working directly with, say, advertisers, there are some off-the-shelf lead management system solutions as well, which you can use for, yes?
Anyone you will recommend?
Oh, not one necessarily. LinkTrust is here, is one you can talk to. They're upstairs. There's a few others. They're the ones I recognize who were here this week. This may be a little bit on the future part of this presentation. When you're able to have data, whoever's hosting that lead, whether it's the network or it's a publisher or an advertiser, well, let's say a network or a publisher, there are and will be additional means of working with that data such that you can better qualify the customer. There are sources of data that help provide behavioral information, or verification information, or demographic information. And through the scrubbing of that lead data, you can even more closely and better target the appropriate advertiser, and which could even lead to more accurate and market-based CPA rates, depending on the types of leads that are come out of based on the different criteria. So there's a lot of potential. Today, I think we're sort of just at the beginning of this, and with lead management systems, there's certainly a lot of third parties that can be inserted in to help better score data, but I think we're just at the beginning of what over the next few years will be an exciting means of really being able to better target data through this type of method. Any questions right now? Yep.
When you sign up with certain advertisers, don't they usually want them, the leads, to fill out on their own forms versus me collecting the data and forwarding it over if they don't even know who I am?
Yeah, often that might be the case. And sometimes it might be even preferable for everybody that way. In some cases, the advertiser, they know their customer really well, and they can give the best experience to create a converting event. So it's not necessarily for all cases. But many cases, there are also all these sorts of buyers out there who want leads. They don't necessarily have the best site. They don't have the best brand. But they'll still pay you just as much for that lead. And if you have the capacity to actually convert one, and not even them, even bigger buyers too. Bigger advertisers may also be interested in open, perhaps after some time, or if they trust you, or depending on how much data you have to host. If there's a lot of personal identifiable information, it's going to be a little bit more tricky and more sensitive. But if there's less of that, there might be often more flexibility. We are certainly seeing more advertisers more flexible to publishers or certain publishers being able to host data. Yeah.
Russ, I'm not very familiar with lead generation, which is why I'm here. But as a consumer, I entered something like an insurance, health insurance, just for the hell of it. My friend's in it. And whoever got me as a lead farmed it out to everybody, and I got 60 calls over 60 days,
Yeah.
which drove me crazy. So how do you control that? So you say, I want an exclusive, just feed me the leads.
As an advertiser?
I'm a merchant.
You're a merchant, yeah.
Yes,
So,
I want leads.
yeah, there's.
But I want it to be exclusive.
You want to be exclusive leads? You can have exclusive leads. Often it's still beneficial to everybody if you are letting a publisher host a forum and you just want leads sold only to you, which is often the case because they don't want that experience. that's certainly doable as well.
And I've known LinkShare since 2003, so LinkShare does have that type of, if I integrated with LinkShare, that works.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Do you have any great examples of, what do you call it, host forms, advertising? Any examples that you can send us to, so we can kind of take a look at the best?
Sure. Best thing actually maybe for you to email me or something, and I can send some things out. But you can also look at some of the I think there's very large lead gen players out there, from Bankrate and Lower My Bills on down as the biggest. There's a lot of big education providers out there. You can also just look at some keywords and see who the top guys are. Those guys are often having more success. But send me an email. I'll give you some more samples. Sure. What's up? Yep.
Yeah, I was really working with a lot of members of lead gen networks, and I find that helpful. I asked if I could have their lead have their lead information, so it would qualify me when the person filled out blanks on my landing page, rather than having a two-step page from my landing page to their landing page. They pretty much don't like that to happen. There are exceptions. Can you name networks that will allow affiliates to put their lead forms on their own pages and be paid for the conversion at their pages rather than the lead gen network pages?
So the lead is completely finished at the publisher end? At
the publisher end, right. And the information goes to the whoever it is that wants the lead.
Mm-hmm.
And you're paid by whoever it is wants the lead.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe a lead gen network will do that as well.
Yeah, we would do that.
What network do you use?
LinkShare, Lead Advantage Network, and LinkShare. So LinkShare only has two networks. We have our overall large affiliate network, which is the standard network, and we have a specific lead generation network called Lead Advantage.
Okay, so LinkShare will do that.
We will.
Are they the only ones?
I don't think so. I think there are a lot of small vertical-focused lead gen providers who might work with publishers that way. As far as other large networks, I couldn't tell you so much.
Are there organizations that provide the networks with their leads that you could name? For example, if I rudely wanted to go right around to it, just go to whoever is feeding you.
Mm-hmm.
What are those networks?
The networks that go around that feed us advertisers. Personally, all of our advertiser relationships are pretty much direct for the most part, but there are certainly lots of aggregators in various verticals who will work with and want to get leads from publishers and may even enable publishers to host their own forums. But typically aggregators are selling leads to multiple people, so they probably won't at the same time want you to sell a lead to more than them, just as a part of the customer experience.
I don't really care. It's pretty much standard copy in paid search that every time a person has to click, that's a decision, and so that if they have to go to your landing page and then the lead gen person's landing page, you're losing a percentage of the traffic.
Mm-hmm.
And so the quicker the person can come to the point where they have to make the decision,
Yeah.
The better.
Exactly. Exactly. That's a huge benefit. You are eliminating a click right there. So it's definitely, in a lot of ways, it gives you a higher conversion potential, gives you more control, and there's a lot you can do with it. There's things you have to think about though. If you're going to host forums, I'll talk about that next. Legal and data issues. So you really have to make sure if you're going to do this, especially if you're going to host data that has personal identifiable information. You got to be really careful. You have to make sure you have a secure means of posting that data over to the buyer or to the network that's buying it, and you have to have a proper means of storing that data. And if you're usually going to have some sort of an agreement with the advertiser or the network on whether you're going to be able to resell that data or not, or reuse that or reprompt that data. In many cases, you may not be, in which case you have to make sure that you don't touch or email anybody in that data. But if you are, then you can. You should have privacy policies on your site so that everybody can clearly know what's happening when the lead is completed on your site. Is it being sold to one person or more than one person? Brand representation I put up here because it's important. If you say that this form is actually going to Liberty Mutual Insurance, and actually that lead may end up being sold to another insurance provider, that's false representation. So you have to be very careful about what you say and how you present yourself on the form. So there's things like that you have to look out for. And then the last is can't spam, which if you're actually going to remarket that data, ultimately an email with it, you really have to make sure you are up to snuff on all the policies around can't spam. And that the way you're collecting the data enables the customer to know that they may be emailed to. Yes? Regulates can't spam? FTC, generally. Yeah. They are, but people get in trouble. Yeah, consumer complaints typically, or company complaints as well. So there's definitely been, over the past year, a fair amount of lawsuits for a variety of these infractions, as well as things like saying that you're giving away something for free, and then you don't, come here, fill out this form, and we'll give you a free iPod or something, and then it doesn't get quite delivered. Those things, type of language is also, you have to be very careful around how you use that. And so, any other questions on form hosting and lead quality and lead data? So the last thing I wanted to touch on was calls and pay-per-call, and this is something that we've been working in and out of for the last year, but we've really started to see some momentum with it over the past recent weeks and months, and I think this is because the technology has gotten a lot more sophisticated and advertisers are really understanding that there's a benefit to it. Essentially, it's allowing completed calls to actually become tracked and commissionable, so that if someone actually, instead of completing a form on an advertiser's site, calls the phone number on the advertiser's site, and that call lasts for a certain amount of duration, the publisher will get full credit for the call as if it were a lead. Yeah.
This pay-per-call, this seems like a relatively new thing.
Yeah.
What kind of saturation with phone numbers do you see problems in the future with like affiliate maybe canceling and stuff, going to do a day job, and then that number being used for other people and problems with tracking commission? Like if you were to sign up to get a phone number from an advertiser,
Mm-hmm.
then you quit, and then LinkShare gave you that number.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of problems do you see in the future with saturated phone number? Are they going to have to start creating new?
Well, phone numbers can be disconnected, can be changed. Phone numbers can be put out of use. Old numbers can be recycled. I've got some pay-per-call experts in the back here who might even be able to help me here. Rob and Jason from Ring Revenue. Does any of you guys have any other insight into that?
Finite number of phone numbers. Millions of affiliates and products and various, I mean, as one affiliate, I can see myself using dozens of phone numbers for various products.
Well, absolutely. And that's actually one of the benefits of it. You actually can use as many numbers as you see fit for a variety of the ways that you actually promote your services.
There's no like foreseeable problem with there being a finite number of
Numbers?
Yeah.
There's a large number of numbers out there. At some point, you have to put a criteria as to the usage around those numbers. If the number is not generating any revenue, it's simply going to be put out of usage, because there is a cost around having a number out there as well. So at some point, a number gets disconnected if there's just no usage to it. And that's just something that has to be monitored and watched. If a publisher has 1,000 numbers.
Is it something you do on your end of the network, or something that advertisers would do?
Either or.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So is LinkShare hosting the call center, or is it always the advertiser?
It could be. At this point, we currently don't have a call center today. Some small providers who focus specifically around something very, very targeted, may have a call center focused around that. But in general, the standard is it's usually the advertiser's call center for the most part. But there's definitely opportunity for third parties to use call centers as well.
So how are you tracking the conversion then? Is the advertiser providing you with that data?
No, the conversion is the phone call. The conversion is a phone call that lasts a certain duration of time or that goes through a certain pathway. So the reason why advertisers today are a little more excited about pay-per-call is because there's a lot more ability to control the quality, just like on a lead form. There could be an entire IVR pathway, meaning that you could have questions that you can ask this customer before you actually connect them through the advertiser to really ensure that the customer is interested in this product. You know, if you are interested in this service, press 1. If you're interested in that service, press 2. If you know, all sorts of filtering type of questions. And then the advertiser may set rules around that they're only going to commission a certain rate if the person answered 1, 2 before I connected them over to the call center, and a different rate for another set of filters, for example, or nothing. That's IVR. IVR stands for Inter-Voice Response? Interactive Voice Response, thanks. IVR. Was there a question? Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
And just as you know, there's a natural way of working TV and internet together. And so I'm wondering, does LinkShare or do you know networks that run pay-per-call around radio programs, so that you can run a campaign
Yep.
that goes in a particular market in conjunction with a particular ad campaign.
Yeah. I mean, that's really where we see this all going. You know, we really see pay-per-call as a way for publishers to start working not just online, but offline as well, and using a variety of offline media.
Do these guys do it? Do you guys do that?
No, they are the provider vendor that we work, that is our back end.
It's a drop-dead natural.
Yeah.
There's a word for it where things work naturally together.
You're absolutely right. The LinkShare pay-per-call platform today supports radio placements at both ends of the radio.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they're tied into radio. They're tied into radio networks.
They're tied into the more
radio advertising programs in particular market segments.
correct. As granular as you want your media placement to be within individual radio markets and programming, even within an individual station, you can track at that level using the LinkShare pay-per-call platform.
That's very good.
And to answer the question I think you had a moment ago, there are sufficient numbers in the platform to enable you to do placements at as granular a level as per search term. And then the platform has some sophisticated algorithms behind it which look at usage on that number by category and look at remnant traffic on it to make some determinations about when it gets repurposed.
Okay, cool.
About, say like you want to do it online and you want to show a number. Usually affiliates don't want, you put a number on your website, they call, they lose the lead,
Right.
that kind of stuff.
Right.
Can it be dynamically driven?
Yes.
So when you serve a sub-ID code,
Right.
can you serve a phone number?
Essentially, that's how it works.
Something
Yeah.
like an iframe or something like that?
Not even an iframe. It's usually a piece of JavaScript on the advertiser's site. So you will bring down and have assigned to you a certain number of phone numbers that you see fit. When a customer comes through your affiliate link and lands on the advertiser's page, your ID will be read, and the phone number that's associated with you in this campaign will appear. And the person will call that phone number and it'll get commissioned and tracked to you. That's how it works.
And is it mostly like these IVR stuff, or could it be just transferred to a live agent?
It could be however the advertiser typically wants to work it. There could be IVR involved. There might not be any IVR involved at all. It could be straight through. It could be a 30-second call that's commissionable. It could be a 60-second call that's commissionable. It could be somebody from Florida getting commissioned, more than somebody getting from another area. There's all sorts of, again, ways to incorporate additional data pieces that can help determine how valuable that customer is up front to the advertiser and pay on that.
How do you monetize it? If someone calls in and say it's a live lead, how do you guys track this commission?
We track it through the phone number, which is routed through the pay-per-call system that we track. So we know everything about that call. It's actually, we know about that call because we're transferring it essentially to the advertiser's call center. So we know all the information about the call, how long it took, what IVR buttons were pressed, everything.
Someone calls and says, screw you, stop.
We have a recording of that, and we can send that out to anybody who wants it. Yeah. Yep.
I don't know if it's an unrelated question, but from your point of view, what kind of lead and call generation has been well on social media platforms such as Facebook?
How can...
What type of media or media, like finance went down 2% from last year, or 07. But maybe it's finance, maybe it's educational, maybe it's whatnot. What type of medium has your company seen work successfully on social media platforms?
Things, it sort of varies. It depends really on the vertical. It depends also on the publisher and their techniques. You've got some publishers who really figured out how to leverage Facebook for shopping, for clothing. They've got apps that work well for it. So it really depends. And another person who might try shopping and products will fall completely flat. You certainly see room for things like education and student or young 20-something types of average, verticals, but it really depends on the execution. I think there's still probably a lot of growth potential there, or people still need to figure out around how to best promote things like Twitter and Facebook. But there's definitely been some successes. So
there's no
5 minutes? Okay.
There's no best practice per se. Is there best practice
Around social media?
around lead gen?
Lead gen overall, pay-per-call, or lead gen? Well, we're talking about them here. There's best practices around, really, I think what the points that I'm trying to drive here is that quality and the tools to generate quality are going to be your best bet, and by getting to quality is doing it by really drilling into a certain area as best as you can, and that's going to get you the better types of customers for the advertiser. Communicating with that advertiser, knowing what's working, trying different things that you can better get to the right media and use the right types of tools at your disposal are going to help you the best. It's a lot different than the regular affiliate marketing, where you could just put up a banner on a general site, and if nothing happens, nothing happens. If someone makes a sale, you make money. If you just put up that banner and a lead is filled out, there's actual consequences to that. If it's really a bad lead, it's costing somebody money. So it does make a lot of sense to put as much effort into the ability to target as much as you can.
How do you manage the privacy issues around call records? You said that you can send a recorded call recording to the advertiser.
Around call recordings? We typically don't actually, we're not going to provide that information unless it's requested or needed. But call recording is, it's recording on the advertiser's side usually. It's the call center of the advertiser where the call is occurring, right? So the customer is actually speaking directly, typically to an advertiser's call center. But it might, if it's not, then those issues have to be worked out. So also, it's I think generally a higher converting, you've got a higher converting type of media here. The person can actually complete the form, or they can complete the call on the site. If it's somewhere else, offline, or somewhere else and someone's calling, you're already engaged with that customer on the phone, which with an online form is typically the second step, right? The form is completed, and then the call happens, and you hope you can get that person on the phone to then ideally close that lead. Here you've got them up front, which is why there's more value potentially, both to the advertiser and to the publisher in the call. Here's an example of what one gentleman asked before about the phone number that gets flashed on the site. This phone number will change depending on what publisher drove the traffic. Yeah. Here's some applications potentially for the future. You've got your classified newspaper ads, you've got mobile apps, you've got TV, radio. There's lots of, it sort of opens the door up in a lot of ways. But ultimately, you know, you have to be able to, you can't just throw the number out there. Again, you have to really have context around what you're doing. And just like anything else, the more you're able to provide in addition to that phone number around the service and pre-qualify or this customer prep them, the more likely you're able to get a good quality call that will make everybody happy. Here's our interface for the publisher side, just so you guys can see it. Essentially, these are phone numbers that this publisher has. They've labeled it themselves where they use that phone number in the internet. They're going to use search. They're going to use this keyword for this phone number, a different keyword for another phone number, and they could just press this button on the right. Can you all still hear me?